Disappearing without a trace is a serious and difficult step. Would you have been able to do that as the hero of today's story, or would you have done it differently? Write your opinion on this in the comments and we'll get started. Marriage had always seemed like a stable promise to me. My wife, Emily, and I had built a life together that felt as solid as the brick home we'd worked years to afford. Sure, we had our ups and downs like any couple, but I thought we'd weathered enough storms to have earned the right to some peace. That illusion shattered on a crisp Friday night in October. Emily had always been social, much more than me. She thrived on connections, dinners with friends, and girls' nights out. I trusted her implicitly, or at least I thought I did. So when she mentioned a big night out with her closest girlfriends, I barely blinked. "Don't wait up for me, babe," she said with a playful wink. "We're going all out tonight." I smiled back, more focused on the game on TV than her plans. "Have fun, just don't drink too much." As the hours ticked by, I stayed in my usual Friday night groove, some light cleaning, a few beers, and watching highlights of the week's sports. Around midnight, I started to feel a twinge of unease. Emily hadn't texted once, not even her usual check-in to let me know things were going well. By 1:30 a.m., I was wide awake, staring at my phone. Then, just after 2 a.m., the front door creaked open. I stood in the living room, frozen. Emily staggered inside, her heels dangling from one hand and her purse barely hanging on her shoulder. Her hair was a mess, her lipstick smeared, and her cheeks flushed with the telltale signs of too much alcohol. "Hey," she slurred, collapsing onto the couch. "Emily, are you okay?" I asked, walking over to her. She mumbled something incoherent and waved her hand dismissively. That's when I noticed it. She wasn't wearing any underwear. The realization hit me like a brick. Her short black dress, now wrinkled and slightly askew, offered no explanation but begged for questions. My heart raced as a sickening sense of dread took over. "Where's your underwear?" I asked, trying to sound calm despite the panic rising in my throat. She blinked lazily at me, her face blank. "What?" "You're not wearing any," I repeated, my voice harder now. Emily's drunken brain seemed to take a moment to process the words. Then she giggled, a soft, nervous laugh that did nothing to ease my concerns. "Oh, must have lost them. Maybe at the club." Her response was like a slap to the face. The words hung in the air, heavy and damning. "Emily, are you serious? How do you just lose your underwear?" She waved me off again, muttering something about dancing too hard and having too much fun. But I wasn't buying it. Every fiber of my being screamed that something wasn't right. As she stumbled off to bed, leaving a faint trail of perfume and alcohol in her wake, I sat down on the couch, my head in my hands. My mind raced through 1,000 possibilities, none of them good. Had she been with someone else? Was she lying to me? I didn't sleep that night. I stayed on the couch, staring at the ceiling, trying to piece together the fractured trust that had held our marriage together. The next morning, Emily woke up hungover and irritable, brushing off my questions with curt replies. But I couldn't let it go. Something inside me had shifted, a dark and growing suspicion that refused to be ignored. Over breakfast, I asked again, "Emily, what really happened last night?" She sighed dramatically, rubbing her temples. "God, not this again. I told you we were out dancing and I got a little too drunk. That's all." "Then why were you missing your underwear?" Her face turned red, not with embarrassment, but with anger. "Why are you making such a big deal out of this? It's just underwear." It wasn't just underwear. It was the trust, the loyalty, the commitment we'd promised each other. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't dealing with the Emily I thought I knew. I didn't argue further. Instead, I let the conversation die and resolved to find out the truth for myself. That night was the turning point, the moment I realized my marriage wasn't what I thought it was. I didn't know yet how deep the betrayal ran, but one thing was certain. I wasn't going to let it slide. The gnawing suspicion wouldn't let me rest. Every time I tried to push it aside, I was haunted by flashes of that night. Emily's slurred excuses, her missing underwear, and her cavalier dismissal of my questions. Something wasn't adding up, and deep down, I knew I couldn't ignore it. The next morning, I put on a mask of normalcy. Emily acted as if nothing had happened, flitting around the house, sipping coffee, and scrolling through her phone like it was just another lazy Saturday. Her nonchalance only fueled my resolve. I needed proof, something concrete to either confirm my fears or put them to rest. When Emily left the house for an errand, I seized the opportunity. I started with her phone, the most obvious place to hide secrets in this digital age. She rarely left it unattended, but she'd carelessly left it on the kitchen counter. My heart raced as I picked it up. I knew her passcode. It was my birthday, a fact that now felt bitterly ironic. Unlocking her phone, I went straight to her messaging apps. Most of the conversations were mundane, filled with harmless chatter about work and plans with her girlfriends. But then I found a thread buried deeper in her texts. It was a name I didn't recognize, Jake. My stomach dropped as I opened the conversation. The messages were vague at first, playful banter about meeting up and inside jokes I didn't understand. But as I scrolled further, they became unmistakably flirtatious. My blood ran cold when I stumbled upon the text from the night of her girls' party. Jake, last night was amazing. Can't stop thinking about you. Emily, you're trouble, Jake. Jake, you left something behind, by the way. Might have to come get it. Emily, keep it safe for me, LOL. The room spun as I read the words. I didn't need a translator to know what something she'd left behind. My hands shook as I closed the app and set the phone back exactly where I'd found it. My heart ached with betrayal, but my mind went into overdrive. I wasn't just going to confront her, I needed a plan. Confrontation wouldn't fix this. If anything, it would give her a chance to lie, twist the truth, or manipulate the situation. No, I wanted her to feel the weight of what she'd done. I started by gathering more evidence. Over the next few days, I kept my composure, playing the role of the oblivious husband while quietly digging deeper. I scoured her social media accounts, looking for patterns or inconsistencies. I even checked our joint bank statements and saw a charge for a hotel room on the same night as her girls' party. That was the final nail in the coffin, I thought. About confronting Jake, but something held me back. Why should he get any satisfaction from knowing I was affected? He was just a symptom of the deeper problem. Emily was the one who betrayed me, the woman I'd loved and trusted above all else. The worst part wasn't even the cheating itself. It was her blatant disregard for me, the way she'd come home that night and treated me like I was some clueless fool. That realization hardened something inside me. That week, I started preparing for the next phase. I knew confrontation alone wouldn't be enough. I wanted her to feel what I felt, confusion, loss, and despair. So I began crafting my exit strategy methodically and with precision. First, I withdrew money from our joint savings account, transferring it to a separate account she didn't know existed. I left enough behind to keep up appearances, but I knew the financial cushion I was building would be crucial later. Next, I started packing my belongings a little at a time. I didn't want to arouse suspicion, so I stashed my things in the trunk of my car bit by bit: clothes, personal items, and anything I considered irreplaceable. All of it quietly disappeared from the house. Finally, I began securing the paperwork for my departure. I researched rental properties in another city and requested time off work under the guise of needing a mental health break. By the end of the week, I'd signed a lease for a small apartment 2 states away. Emily remained oblivious through it all, wrapped up in her own world. She'd started going out more frequently, sometimes not even bothering to tell me where she was going. I stopped asking, knowing that my questions wouldn't yield honest answers. One night, as she sat across the table scrolling through her phone, I finally broke the silence. "Emily, do you love me?" I asked, my voice calm but deliberate. She glanced up, startled by the question. "What?" "Of course I do. Why would you even ask that?" "No reason," I said with a tight smile, "just wondering." She returned to her phone, brushing off my question like it was nothing. But that brief exchange told me everything I needed to know. She didn't care, not really, and soon she'd realize just how much she had taken me for granted. As I went to bed that night, I felt no more doubt, no hesitation. The truth was out in the open, at least for me. My next steps were clear. I would leave without a trace, and she would wake up to the emptiness she had created. The countdown had begun. Leaving someone you've shared a life with isn't easy, no matter how much they've hurt you. The logistics alone were daunting, but the emotional weight was heavier still. Emily had been in my world for years, and even though I knew she had shattered my trust beyond repair, part of me still mourned the life we'd built together. But every time I felt the ache of what I was about to do, I thought back to that night, her drunken giggle, the text messages, and the blatant betrayal. It steeled my resolve. I spent the next week finalizing my escape. I knew the key to disappearing without a trace was thorough preparation. Emily was smart, and if I left any loose ends, she'd find a way to track me down or, worse, twist a narrative to make me the villain. First, I made sure all my financial bases were covered. Our joint accounts were dwindling as I quietly siphoned off money, transferring it into my own separate account. I also cashed out a portion to keep on hand. Emily might freeze the account out of spite once she realized I was gone. I paid off all my personal credit cards and canceled any memberships tied to our shared address. I even took the extra step of changing my mailing address to a P.O. box in the city where I planned to start over. Next, I severed ties with anything that could lead her to me. I quit my job, citing a personal emergency. My boss was sympathetic, and I left on good terms, knowing I might need a reference in the future. I also deleted my social media accounts, a drastic but necessary step to ensure Emily couldn't trace me. One night, as Emily was out again, no doubt with her friends or worse, I began clearing out the house. I focused on the things that mattered most: family heirlooms, sentimental items, and anything that would be too painful to leave behind. I didn't bother with furniture or decor. Those were just material things, easily replaced. I left behind our wedding album. The thought of taking it felt like poison in my veins. What was the point? Those photos were lies now, snapshots of a life that had never truly existed. By the end of the night, my car was packed, and the house felt emptier, both literally and emotionally. The hardest part was saying goodbye to people who didn't even know they were losing me. My parents lived out of state, so I called them under the guise of needing a fresh start. They were supportive as always, and I promised to visit soon. As for mutual friends, I kept my plans vague. Taking some time for myself, I'd say, brushing off their questions. The fewer people who knew the truth, the safer my plan would be. I also left a letter for Emily, not out of sentimentality, but for closure. It wasn't long or overly emotional, just a few lines explaining that I knew about her betrayal and that I couldn't stay in a marriage built on lies. I didn't include any specifics or address her by name. I wanted her to sit with the ambiguity, to question herself as much as I questioned her. The final night came quickly. Emily was home, curled up on the couch with her phone. She'd barely acknowledged me all evening, engrossed in whatever drama was playing out on her screen. I watched her for a moment, memorizing the details, the way her hair fell over her shoulder, the small furrow in her brow as she scrolled. For a brief, fleeting second, I almost felt regret. But then I remembered Jake, the hotel charge, the texts. No, I couldn't stay. At 4 a.m. I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake her. My bags were already in the car, my escape meticulously planned. The house was eerily quiet as I walked through it one last time, taking in memories that now felt like ghosts. Before leaving, I placed the letter on the kitchen counter, weighed down by her favorite coffee mug. It felt poetic in a way, her betrayal exposed, delivered with the same casual disregard she'd shown me. I stepped outside, the cold air biting at my face. The sunrise was just beginning to paint the horizon as I started the car and drove away. I didn't look back. By the time Emily woke up, I was miles away, crossing the state line. My phone buzzed incessantly with calls and messages, but I ignored them. I knew she'd read the letter by now, and the panic in her texts confirmed it. Emily, where are you? What's going on? Emily, we need to talk. Please come home. Emily, what do you mean you're leaving? Is this a joke? Her desperation was palpable, but I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, just a hollow sense of vindication. She'd made her choices, and now she'd have to live with them. I arrived in my new city by midday, my belongings crammed into a tiny apartment I'd rented under a pseudonym. The space was sparse and unfamiliar, but it felt like freedom. That night, as I lay on the bare mattress, I thought about Emily. Was she crying furious, trying to spin the story to her friends? It didn't matter. For the first time in years, her emotions weren't my responsibility. The house was unnervingly silent when Emily woke up the next morning. The familiar scent of coffee brewing was missing, as was the sound of me moving around in the kitchen. She rolled over, expecting to see me sitting on the edge of the bed, scrolling through my phone like I did most mornings. Instead, she was met with an empty space. Still groggy from sleep, she shrugged it off. Maybe I'd left early for work or gone out for a morning run. She shuffled into the kitchen, yawning, but stopped short when she saw the note. The coffee mug sat on top of a single sheet of paper, its presence feeling oddly final. Emily picked up the letter with a frown, her eyes scanning the brief, damning words. Emily, I know. I can't do this anymore. Don't try to find me. I made sure you won't be able to. Goodbye. Her heart dropped. At first, she didn't understand, or perhaps she didn't want to. The ambiguity gnawed at her, forcing her to confront the secrets she'd buried. Panic surged as she checked the rest of the house. The closets were half empty, my shoes missing from the entryway. She ran to the bathroom. My toothbrush, razor, and toiletries were gone. Even the familiar warmth of my scent had vanished. The realization hit her like a freight train. I hadn't just left for work or a jog. I'd left for good. Emily's first reaction was to call me, but every attempt went straight to voicemail. Text after text was met with silence. Her desperation grew as she checked our joint accounts, only to find them nearly drained. The financial safety net she'd assumed was there had vanished with me. Her panic turned to anger. She threw her phone onto the couch, pacing the living room. What the hell is wrong with him? She muttered to herself. But as the hours ticked by, anger gave way to fear. She called her closest friends, hoping they might know where I'd gone. He just left, she explained, her voice trembling. No warning, no explanation. What if something happened to him? Her friends tried to console her, but suspicion lingered in their voices. Are you sure you don't know why he left? One of them asked. Emily hesitated. Of course not. I mean, we've been fine, mostly. But they weren't buying it. Over the next few days, Emily's life began to unravel. The gossip started small, just whispers among friends about how I'd walked out, leaving her blindsided, but soon, questions about why I left grew louder. People began piecing things together, her nights out, the way she flirted openly with strangers, and her increasingly distant behavior toward me. Her closest friend, Claire, confronted her directly. Emily, is there something you're not telling us? Claire asked, her tone sharp. Because it doesn't add up. He doesn't seem like the kind of guy who'd just leave without a reason. Emily's defenses crumbled. She broke down in tears, admitting to Claire that she'd been seeing someone else. It wasn't serious, she sobbed. It didn't mean anything. I didn't think he'd find out. Claire's disappointment was palpable. You didn't think he'd find out, Emily? That's not the point. You betrayed him. What did you expect? Emily's struggles weren't just social, they were financial too. With our joint savings nearly empty, she was left scrambling to cover bills. She'd always relied on me to manage our finances, and now, with no backup plan, she was drowning. Her attempts to reach out to Jake, the man she'd risked everything for, only added to her humiliation. He ghosted her entirely, avoiding her calls and ignoring her texts. Emily quickly realized that whatever fleeting excitement she'd felt with him had evaporated, leaving her alone and abandoned. Weeks turned into months, and Emily's life continued its downward spiral. She struggled to maintain her job, her performance slipping under the weight of stress and guilt. Friends she'd once considered close began to distance themselves, their judgment unspoken but undeniable. Even her family grew cold when she finally confessed the truth to her mother, hoping